Welcome back to the Telos Center Podcast, a resource for training people in truth and love to live inspired, to make life all about God. I am your host, Pastor Nate. We are back in our series, reading the Bible, answering the question, what does the Bible say? Often people do not read the Bible for all various reasons, from time to life issues to straight rejection of God. But nonetheless, this is a historical document. Ultimately, it is the revelation of God in written form, revealing the epicenter of this person and work of Jesus, the Christ, revealing He is who He says He is. That you can put the entirety of your faith in Him and become a Christian, following Him. So now we are in Genesis chapter 4. Let me read it first, and then we'll go back through little by little. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1 reads, Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Verse 2, And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? Verse 7, If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Verse 9, Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is Abel, your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Verse 11, And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Verse 13, Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Verse 15, Then the Lord said to him, Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who find him should attack him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Verse 17, Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Verse 18, To Enoch was born Arad, and Arad, or Irad, fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methusael, and Methusael fathered Lamech. And Lamech took two wives. The name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other Zillah. Adah bore Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jabal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre, and pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal Cain was Naamah. Verse 23, Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. Verse 24, if Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. Verse 25, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time people began to call upon the name of the Lord. Now, as we walk back through Genesis chapter 4, as you can tell, we start to have more of a development of names, of people, than just Adam and Eve. There starts to be a population concept, an increasing idea. Now, this is part of God's plan from Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where He's telling them to be fruitful and multiply. But what chapter 4 is developing, it is leading us and showing us, revealing to us, not just the multiplication of humanity, but the multiplication of sin, the multiplication of Genesis chapter 3, when sin, evil entered the world. And then it becomes generational. This becomes a pain. It's not just a physical pain in childbearing, in the physical labor and delivery. This is an ongoing pain. Imagine if you were Eve and she finds out that her boys, her sons, are growing up to be killers, murderers. What kind of pain would that be, especially if she doesn't want that? Now, if she's crazy and she wants that to happen, then that's a whole different story. But this is where Eve would not want that. She would not want Cain to kill Abel. She would not want disaster upon her children, no matter how old they were, whether they were young to elderly. So chapter 4 is showing us the multiplication in various aspects, but it also shows us the presence of God in humanity, that He has not left. He is continued, and He is continued to bear judgment upon them, to bear instruction upon them, to guide them. But He still has promised in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, that one is going to come through the family line to ultimately crush Satan's head. He will crush him. So therefore, any sin that is done at this point, He is not going to take instantaneous judgment upon these people. It may get to that, and it actually does. It builds to that, but He's patient. He's enduring, because there is multiple things that are going to happen. He will have widespread judgment. He will have specific, narrow judgment on certain people. And He will have then His judgment wrath come upon Jesus when He comes years later. And then in the end, as we read in various parts of the Old and New Testament of the Bible, that there will be a final day, a final cleansing day of evil. There will be a full perfection, a completedness. But until then, God is going to be very patient and provisional to deal with sin. And we start to see that from Genesis chapter 4 on, especially in the concept of the first sons, the first people of Adam and Eve. All the sin starts with Adam and Eve and Satan. God blamed all three of them, though they tried to blame shift. But it becomes generational, it becomes familial, it becomes part of the family, it becomes part of the earth. And you see the godlessness aspect of it, that He does not want this, but it is happening. So we go into chapter 4, verse 1. It says, Now Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. When you get to know the underlying Hebrew language to this, the English word for new is actually not just new like I got to know you today, nice meeting you. This is not a greeting. This is not a full understanding of the knowledge of someone else, of what they've done in life, but this is a sexual, intimate relationship between two that are married, male and female. They have come together. Adam knew his wife. They have had sex to then result in a multiplication of humanity, a part of God's plan. And therefore she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with help of the Lord. So she doesn't attest, she does not look to Adam as her provider, as the one who provides the child. She looks to the Lord, that he has fulfilled a promise, that he has said, be fruitful and multiply, and he's given them ways to do that. He's shown himself both in creation and the sustaining of creation, the multiplication of creation, especially humanity. And so therefore, even in God's judgment to Adam and Eve, in his curse to them, he is still allowed for the multiplication of children. And even today, in the 21st century in which I'm recording this, there is a concept of people not wanting to have children in this world because they believe it is so evil. That is a wrong foundation and a misunderstanding from Genesis 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and even chapter 4. There's been evil in this world for a long time, well before us. The reason for children is that it was God's plan to be fruitful and multiply and subdue it, have dominion over it. That means dwell upon it, grow, multiply, manage, make decisions, have relationships, continue this pattern because this is a godly pattern. We don't base our decisions based upon evil. Our decisions are to be based upon God. In that, we will then have to deal with evil. We will have to figure out ways to be wise in our dealings, to be aware of snares and lies and deception. We have to live in the world for sure, but we're to live in the world according to what God wants, not according to what Satan wants or anything that is sinful in us. So in verse 2, and again she bore his brother Abel. So another kid. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep. Cain was a worker of the ground. So you have a shepherd and you have a farmer, but really both are farmers in the sense they're working in nature. You know, farmers have animals and they're also work the ground, but these two are particular on their skill sets, and that's what they did with their talents. Verse 3, in the course of time, Cain brought the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. This is the older brother bringing an offering to the Lord, not for sin's sake, but just an offering. This is part of God's plan, that there would be a bringing to the Lord of what a part of our life, recognizing that God is over all of our life. And that if we trust him in the little, we can trust him in the all. If we can trust him in the part, we can trust him in the whole. And so as he brings him the offering, this is of the fruit of the ground. This is the production, the produce, what has come up that he has managed, he has worked. It doesn't talk about the quality at this point, but in verse 4 it gives a comparison. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of this flock and their fat portions. Now of these two, you have supposedly the best. The first fruits is the English word that gets repeated through the Old and the New Testament, especially when it comes to the tabernacle and the temple, of what we learn about the tabernacle in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So in verse 5, but for Cain, in verse 4 towards the end, and the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. So the Lord is looking at Abel and he is affirming Abel's offering. So we're getting the judgment of God. Now the judgment of God does not always mean a judgment as if you're going to be cursed, dead, something bad happens to you. It just means he's discerning, he is decision making, he is understanding the situation, and in that we're starting to see that outplay. We're starting to see God's perspective again upon humanity, and he's seeing the nakedness of humanity. He sees the hearts of humanity, not just the stuff, not just the leaves, not just the trees, not just the offerings. So he had regard for Abel and his offering. But in verse 5, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So something's going on where the Lord understands that this is not about sheep versus fruit, as if one is more blessed than the other, as if the ground is cursed, therefore if you bring an offering from the ground, you bring a cursed offering. That's not the logic. It's not the instruction that God is saying. There's something deeper at play. It can be the quality of the offering, but it might also be the quality of the character and the heart of the giver. There's a both and in there. It could be either or it could be both and. But right now, Moses, in writing this, he's being led to reveal that the Lord had disregard for Cain and he had regard for Abel. It had nothing to do with the older son being the bad and the younger son being the good. It's not about age. It's not about being male. It's not about having a sinful mother Eve. This has to deal with now the relationship individually before the Lord. Because here, Cain's issues will have some generational impact, but not as much as Eve. Right now, God is going to deal directly with these two. And that becomes, in verse 5, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard, so Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The other word would be countenance. His countenance fell. You could see a visually different person. You know, sometimes we can identify somebody physiologically. There's also a sense of their, some people call an aura. We don't believe in an aura, but sometimes the aura concept is getting a little closer to what is actually truthful about people. Is we have emotions and we have a spirit about us, a soul, a life that is not just physiological. And so all that comes into play in a reaction in the real world. And so Cain is reacting to the Lord in his disregard. Now it becomes, well, who's wrong in this? Is God wrong? Is his judgment wrong? Or is this just a fairy tale fiction? Or is Cain's response wrong? Just as something prior to that was wrong, whether it was Cain's offering or Cain's heart or Cain's character. But God is showing something, he's revealing something to Cain, where Cain should have been humbled before the Lord, received his instruction, learned from his mistake, learn from errors, seek understanding, seek wisdom, seek forgiveness from the Lord. But no, his heart becomes hardened. His countenance changes. And it changes into an anger, but this is an unrighteous anger. This is not a righteous anger. This is an unrighteous anger. There's a foundational, ungodly, disconnected from God, godless response. This is not of God. So, verse 6, the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? Why has your countenance fallen? Why have you responded in this way? In verse 7, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. The Lord just revealed something to Cain as well as the rest of the world, including us today. He revealed something that sin does not have dominion over us. God does not allow sin, his purpose does not allow sin to rule humanity. That is a lie from Satan, that you must succumb, you must fall down to evil, sin. You know, if it's just such a struggle to deal with, just cave, just go with it. You know, it's harder to stand up in a river that's powerful and pushing against you, and if you continue to go against the flow, it'll be a hard way of going, a hard life. But here, God is saying you can be actually taken out of that. He's more powerful than a powerful river of sin. You do not have to succumb to it. What you do need to succumb to is God himself. That's the point. That's the point. Whether you're clothed or you're naked before the Lord, you want to be in a relationship with him, clothed in his righteousness, identified with him, in a relationship with him based upon his judgment. You want to entrust your life with him. That's the instruction to Cain. But he's not having it. Cain at this point is willing to let sin rule over him instead of God ruling over him. And the point is not that we are masters of sin. The point is God is. And if God is then master of our life, if he's truly the creator that we entrust, then therefore he will deal with sin. It's not as if we are more powerful to have dominion or rule over this. That's not the case. He gives us provision, guidance, instruction, his presence, people. He gives us past to reference. He gives us moments in the present, help, and he gives hope for the future. We're to entrust to him, and he then deals with us and the rest. In verse 8, you have Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. So now Cain has responded to God, and what do you think he's going to respond now to part of his family? Well, if he's not going to love God, why would he then love his neighbor? Why would he love one of his closest neighbors, his brother, his younger brother? Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. This is the first murder that we witness in the Bible, right here in Genesis chapter 4. 4 chapters in the Bible. Now, when people talk about the Bible being some type of fairy tale, or holy fairy tale, or some holy rated G or PG movie, they do not understand. That is a misunderstanding or a complete rejection of the reality of the revelation of God in written form we understand as the Bible. God reveals the reality of who he is, what the past is, and who we are. That helps us actually clearly deal with the present, as well as the past, as well as the future. And so we see the murder. God reveals it. He doesn't paint a rosy picture over this. This is what happened. In verse 9, then the Lord said to Cain, we're back again. The Lord's right at him. Now the Lord, could he have prevented this? Could he have stopped Cain? Do you think he knew that was going to happen? Do you think the Lord was against Abel and decided that, you know what, let's use Cain's evil to kill Abel? No. This is not that. God is patient, even when there's evil. There's reasons why, and his name is Jesus. But until then, we see in verse 9, and the Lord said to Cain, God is present, speaking, where is Abel your brother? Do you think the Lord knows? Do you think this God knows? Yes, he does. He knows. He's doing what he did to Cain's dad in the garden. Why? Who? Where are you? Where are you, Adam? What have you done? Why are you hiding? Why are you doing this? He knows the answers. But he's pulling them out. He's pulling attention of Adam to himself. He's pulling attention to Cain. He's revealing his nakedness, his sin before him. And he's showing him not just his sin, but he's showing him himself. That is the power of God. We don't want people to see their sin. We want people to see the Lord. He then reveals their sin. Without God, how do you know what is sinful and evil? You don't. He tells us, he shows us, he reveals to us what is good and what is evil. He is the definition of good. And the definition of evil is lacking him, godlessness. And so what do you think Cain is right now? He's godless in this moment. God is revealing himself. He's pursuing Cain. He's pursuing a sinner. He's pursuing a destructor of humanity. He's pursuing a murderer. He's pursuing one of his first creations, one of the first baby that we would recognize out of Adam and Eve. He is pursuing, he is going after this. He is making sure that his word remains on the earth, not just the blood of Abel. So, what do you have? You have Cain's response, verse 9. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" Cain said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" That's a lie. Boom. We go from murder to a liar. We go from something wrong in his offering, something wrong in his heart or character, to murder to lying. He is completely hard to the Lord. Verse 10, and the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. It is revealing to me the sin. It's revealing to me the evil." Verse 11, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Verse 12, when you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. This is a continual curse from Genesis 3 to the curse of Adam. This is a further burden almost. This is a weight. It is revealing a hardship, a continual hardship upon Cain, showing him the consequences of what he's done. Either you can have that or you can have lifelessness. God can kill you right now, but he's patient. He's kind. He's going to wait. He's going to put your sin, not just leave you with it. He's going to put your sin upon this coming Messiah. He's the only one to take upon our sin. Cain cannot bear it. This is a temporal judgment. This is not an eternal judgment. This is an earthly judgment. A lot of people reject and question the notion of, oh, well, why is there an eternal judgment? Well, I don't know about you, but if you have ever lost somebody to murder, and that murderer dies immediately, a lot of people's reactions are, I want that person to live on the earth to suffer longer. Some want immediate death, like a capital punishment. Others, or including those, want a continual suffering that will last a lifetime, almost eternally. There's a sense of which just people understand that just because somebody dies, that's not enough of a punishment. So right now, God is actually saying this is a temporal earthly punishment, but there is an overarching spiritual, eternal judgment. That's a weight that no one can bear except for one, and his name will later be known as Jesus. Until then, he's the Messiah, the Christ, the coming one. And so you have in verse 12, when you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Verse 13, Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Yes, that is so true. That's one of the truest statements you could have said so far, Cain. You're admitting something that the Lord has done. Verse 14, Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. So far has he confessed his sin. Has he sought the Lord for forgiveness? So far, what Moses is revealing in his writing of this is that Cain is still looking out for himself. He's looking out now beyond the blood and the life and the murder and the lies and the cover-up of killing Abel, his younger brother. He's looking to now his own future. What will that be like? He is fearing someone going to kill him, just as he has killed his brother Abel. Verse 15, Then the Lord said to him, Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. So God is not done with Cain. Later on at the end of this book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 50, there's other things that happen. And a verse comes up and it reveals that God will use evil for his good. It's not that he intends or plans evil. That is not God. But he will providentially do things where he will still work in time and work with the people who are sinners, work with humanity. He will do temporal cleansing, he will do temporal judgment, he will do temporal cursing, but until that one final day where he eternally cleans house upon the earth, he is not done until that day. But there is one truly finished work that gets completed before that day, and that finished work comes out of the mouth of the Lord Jesus Christ on the cross. It is finished. Salvation from sin and final judgment is finished through the personal work of Jesus. It's not through Cain. It's not through Abel. Abel's death will not save Cain. Cain's attempt to live a better life will not save Abel, will not save Cain's own life. God has a greater plan for Cain, and he is going to allow him to wander, to have great difficulty, to have great hardship upon the earth, and he will wander. That means he is walking, he is lost, he is going to be struggling, and that's what happens when you deal with evil, with sin. You will be lost. You'll be lost in your own sin, and you'll be lost in your response to God's instruction upon your sin. If you're not one to understand, if you're one to reject, God will ultimately continue to reveal that he does exist. And at this point, Cain actually understands his plight. He understands his own situation. Now, what's interesting is he actually is going to wander. And it says in verse 15, And the Lord said, Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken upon him sevenfold. So there's in some ways a protective element to Cain, but not as if he's protecting a murderer or protecting sin. He's developing, he's allowing, he's doing something. And it says, And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone found him should attack him. He does something to Cain's body to identify him. Now, we don't know what that is. There's been a lot of weird interpretations over the centuries. Really strange ones. We do not know what a mark is at this point. We could try to assess marks during Moses' day. And so when Moses writes a mark, in the Hebrew language, what does that look like? Is that having to do with skin, bone structure, a cut, something going on the face, on the head, on the body? What is it? It's just difficult. Is it a birth mark? I mean, you just don't know. But it would be very distinct for the rest of the people to see immediately, probably from afar, but at least close up, that they would say, oh, this is Cain. He would be very distinct. Not holy, but he would be different. So you have in verse 16 an interesting development. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Now, Nod has a meaning of wandering, the land of wandering, the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain has gone away from the presence of the Lord. He's wandering this world, and he is actually settled in an area, a plot of land, where this is in a sense where he will dwell in isolation. And in verse 17, Cain knew his wife. Therefore, at this time, at some point, he has a wife. Now, we don't know the particulars of timing or where this woman comes from, but there's a development in the story where he now has a wife, and he's having sex with her, that then she conceives and bears Enoch. So Enoch is going to come from Cain. That means you have a woman that is married to a murderer, and now a son is being born through that relationship. His dad is a murderer. He murdered his uncle. It says, when he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Verse 18, to Enoch was born Arad, and Arad fathered Jael, and Jael fathered Methuselah, and Methuselah fathered Lamech. So now we have generational development. What we don't have is kind of what mothers do today, where you kind of have a when they have babies, they're taking care of babies, and they're tracking almost the minutes, the hours, the days and the weeks, the development of their baby. And we have a snapshot of pictures and belongings, and maybe some hair, the first haircut. We have certain things, and when we look back 20 years later, we have this kind of unfolding of what this child looked like, what they've done, what they've gone through. There's a baby book potentially. There's a picture book. A lot of things now are online, but there's a sense of unfolding, but a very specific time frame. Here, it's a very different picture. It's a wide, overarching span of time. We're talking decades. We're talking generations spanning. We're talking where these kids have been born and grown up, and then they have a wife, they have kids, they are born and they grow up in that pattern, and we have names to that. Now, this is what's interesting about the book of the Bible, is that you have specific place names, specific people names. Some of these places, some of these names cannot be tracked today, some can. Not everything is clear and easy and discoverable, but a lot of it is. A majority of it is. And we have names to that. What's really helpful is when you read through the Bible, you start to see some of these names pop up again in what we considered family trees, genealogies, which a lot of people consider boring, which I have for sure considered boring. And a lot of the names can be very difficult to pronounce, especially when they come from the Hebrew language and translated into English. And if you're someone who understands the Hebrew, you have a lot better time pronouncing the Hebrew name, especially if you're reading the Hebrew text. But if you're just working off an English text, we're trying to use our own ways of pronouncing and enunciating these names, which have fun with it. It's not a big deal if you're messing up these names. God knows. But the point is, you have an unraveling, a revealing of God's providential plan in using each of these people. He's going to use evil for his good. He's going to work through the evil of humanity for his good, for his sake. And he's getting specific. So verse 19, Lamech took 2 wives. 2 wives. Whoa. Is this going with or against God's word? I thought God said only 1 wife, right? Genesis 2:24 and 25, that you train them up. And therefore, Genesis 2:24, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And now Lamech is adding another that is not right. So the name of the one was Ada or Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. Is that right? No, it's not right. It's not good. We're having a development of generational sin. This is not good. Verse 20, Ada bore Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. So in Moses' mind and his writing down, there's a concept that they would understand tents and livestock. There was a wandering aspect. There was a movability. There was not structures being built, that these were people living in tents, kind of nomadic. They're people of the earth. They are doing what God said to do in Genesis 1, take care of the livestock. They're doing it, but they might not be doing it for God's sake. They might be doing it for their own sake. Verse 21, his brother's name was Jabal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. I like to say lyre. Verse 22, Zillah also bore Tubal Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. Look at that, becoming musical. That's a good thing. That's creative. It's bringing about good noise. Now, it might not always have been good noise to begin with, as he's probably testing some things out early on. It's like having a child in your home, your house, your apartment, your flat, wherever you're at, and they're playing an instrument and it sounds horrible to begin with, but hopefully over time it sounds better. But here we do have instruments. We have a forger of instruments, but are these instruments musical? These instruments probably are tools. These instruments are probably having to do with music and also livestock. So either way, they know how to work bronze and iron. So that means, where's bronze and iron coming from? It's coming from the ground. So that means they have found ways early on to be digging in the earth, to recognize certain rock formations, certain elements of the earth, to start to assess immediately, whether it's over decades or generations, that things are usable of the earth. And then they're usable for various ways to create music, or create tools for farming, to create tools for shepherds dealing with livestock, maybe for cutting. Either way, you start to see the development, the creativity early on. These people were smart. They were not cavemen. They were logical. They were rational. They were survivors. They were gritty. They were relational. They were sexual beings. They were God's creation. And so you have in verse 23, Lamech said to his wives, right, plural, 2, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. Verse 24, if Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. He understands that there is a consequence to his sin. Now, who did he go to? God or his wives? He's at least communicating whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but he's at least revealing, hey, you're with me. This is not a good thing. If you think Cain's wife has it bad, just imagine you two. 77-fold. So verse 25, and Adam knew his wife. So now we go back to Adam. This is not a new Adam. This is the original Adam from Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, as well as in Genesis 3, and Genesis 2, and Genesis 1. So we end with, in verse 24, Lamech being, right, generations away from his ultimately great-great-great-grandpa, Cain. So they understand the storyline of their family, the storyline of his sin, the storyline of their issues, their storyline of their physiological makeup, their God's instruction, God's judgment on the past and now applied to his present and what their future looks like. Man, God's word is just so rich with insight. It is there for the taking. We could spend hours just in one text. It's beautiful. So in verse 25, and Adam knew his wife again. She bore a son and called his name Seth. So far we have at least 3 immediate children born to Eve, Adam and Eve, and we have Cain, Abel, and Seth. Now Abel is dead at some point, and Seth appears on the scene. We don't have necessarily a timeline at this point, but at least we know the relationship, the familial relationship. So there's Seth. Let me read verse 25 again. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. So now we have a development of a timeline so far. And in that timeline, we see that Seth comes after the murder. Now, again, we don't have specifics. Is this like 30 minutes later? Is this a year later? Is this 30 years later? Well, at this point, we just know Seth has come after as if it's God's provision. Well, was it God's provision to Eve to give her Cain and Abel? Yep. So that means Cain, before he murdered Abel, was a gift of God, a blessing, a promise from Genesis 1 to be fruitful, multiplying. Yep. Isn't that interesting? A blessing that is a curse. Something that could be unbearable and some other things could be bearable. Maybe Seth at this point is bearable. This is a good thing. But she sees it as appointed by God. For this is a direction of God. This is a provision of God. This is a replacement of Abel, she's thinking. Verse 26, the last verse of this chapter. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. And at that time people began to call upon the name of the Lord. Now look at that. Instead of wandering away from the presence of the Lord, they're returning to the Lord. They're calling upon the name of the Lord. They're recognizing the name of the Lord. There's a development of good happening. Now, is this development of good coming from them? Well, kind of, yeah, they're responding, but what are they responding to? Their Creator, the Sustainer. They're recognizing. Doesn't mean they're better than Cain, or they're better than Lamech, or they're better than the other side of the family, their older brother, as if this younger brother Seth, now the baby of the family, is better. No, that is not the case. But what Moses is writing down as the author of this book is descriptive that at this point, that Seth and his children, especially Enosh, they're calling upon the Lord. They're recognizing him for who he is. Now let's transitions into Genesis chapter 5, going and connecting the dots from Adam to Noah. And we'll continue on in our Reading the Bible series, answering the question, the big overarching question of what does the Bible say? We can apply that to all various aspects of life. And that's why we want to go verse by verse, chapter by chapter, from beginning to end of this book, and we see the great details of the books. But one overarching theme: God. Man, this is good stuff. God's Word is beautiful. So until next time, if you have any questions, please let me know. reply from your podcast platform. These podcasts are being put on YouTube. You can reply in the comments. But wherever you can, let me know if you have questions. And until next time, Pastor Nate out.